Hi and welcome back. I'm Flop, and this is my Art of War version 1.2 release overview. So I know I haven't been on the channel much, and let me just explain that first. So I had a job. I no longer have the job. There's about 2 weeks in between there where I lost touch with everything as we did closing measures on our little software development company. So I got really busy in real life, and I'm afraid that my YouTube presence disappeared. And the latest release of my mod was delayed by 2 weeks because I didn't have time to polish it off, even though I only had like 5% of it left to finish. But that period is over, and I'm proud to say that instead of picking up a real person job, I'm going to take a crack at YouTube instead with my friend Evan. You may know him from the live streams as Scholark of Lizard Town, my moderator. And perhaps from some of my older videos, he would Steam chat with me while I was playing. We are going to make a YouTube brand with a couple channels, and we're going to do a nerd variety show with a heavy focus on gaming, but we're also going to draw some of our interesting friends and acquaintances and their skills into the mix. So you can expect that to start up. I think December we're going to drop our first content. There'll be more videos explaining what's going on, and we'll start doing some preview material on this channel. But that will spell the end of this particular channel. I have another channel, a Flop channel, that will be under the brand of our YouTube. So expect exciting things in the future, and I hope to see you there. But for now, let's get with it. So I wrapped up version 1.2 today, and I just made it live on Nexus Mods, and I wanted to go over what it's got. I am going to switch to my notes, which is going to pause the video, but that's because it's intense. So there are a lot of balance adjustments. The biggest one was, let's see, there's a couple of big ones. For one, interceptor arming time is reduced. Beam and advanced beam techs are easier to acquire. They're kind of like a half step up in the terms of technology. They're not quite a full tech jump. Gauss, Pulse, and Plasma will each be significantly more powerful. Whereas Beam is kind of a mixed bag. You might want to mix it a lot heavily with Vanilla, but you can get it quick. Reduced interceptor arming time. This is just the small balance changes. Reduced interceptor max damage time. Snipers. I replaced Mayhem with Bring 'em On in the perk tree at the very end. Bring 'em On, very effective for snipers, as they are now crit based. Gunners, I replaced Flush in that first choice. That is, after you get suppression, you can take Flush. Now, instead of Flush, you can take Squad Sight, so that you can, because the gunner weapons all have some amount of Squad Sight on them, range. So, yeah. Take Flush instead of Squad Sight, because Flush is now on the heavy cannons. Gene mod times reduced. I toned down the pain, the cost that diminishing returns inflicts on you for your satellites. Sectoids and floaters, you can expect more health on them to make up for the weapon's increased power. You'll find hardened enemies show up more often. Significantly more for some races than others, but in general, hardened is more common on enemies, non-mechanical ones. Mechanical ones all have hardened. Their sleepers, now you get a little step back. When you take muscle fiber density or lightning reflexes, both in the mobility tree, they come with a -1 mobility. I found that pretty much the mobility-based sleeper is the one everyone goes for, and so I'm going to balance it out a little bit. You'll still gain net plenty of mobility, but it's toned down a bit. Snipers can no longer use armor-piercing ammo items. Neural damping for sleepers increases fatigue by 24 hours. That was increased. The other gene mods, not so much. They're the same. New soldiers cost 45, so that's half of what they did. Your starting amount of soldiers is 24, and the barracks caps at 60 now. Field surgeon now goes on medkits, so that reduces the hospital penalty, the wounded penalty for taking a wound by 1 damage points worth, which can completely negate 1 health wounds. And I've rethemed, so that's on medikits and not available anywhere else. And now, so the commands had that in their perk tree. They now have regen biofield, except it's called first responder, which allows them to slowly restore people back up to their maximum natural health. It does not restore armor. And I return the rocket launcher to deal 7 damage. Okay, so those were the small balance adjustments. There are some big changes. First off, let's talk about aim. You now gain bonuses to hit at pretty much sight range. If you are at 30 or less range, 30 being soldiers' current sight range, you should be gaining from plus 2% chance to hit to plus 56% chance to hit at like point blank, standing right beside someone range, which is significantly higher at close ranges than it was before. This means that the distance from your enemy to you offers a great deal of benefit and or protection. So this should encourage medium range combat a bit more, as at long range you can't benefit from that. Basically at squad sight you're not benefiting from this close range thing. I did knock everyone's aim down by 20 points to account for the bonus, and I've added bonuses onto weapons. So like take the assault rifle. It has plus 16 aim, and then of course with the distance bonus you can expect to have, I don't know, a good, at the very edge of your vision you should get plus 2, and for every distance closer the enemy is, you should get another 2% chance to hit. Because distance in the game isn't measured in tiles, you can expect the variance to be, you should get a little more aim than the number of squares times 2%. But that's how it works now. The closer you are, the more accurate you will be. I found the accuracy is generally a bit better at medium range. Long distance weapons are gonna be a little, obviously won't benefit from that, like snipers and marksman rifles. So another benefit to fighting at moderate to close range. Remember, the enemies also benefit from this. They also got the 20 point aim penalty. Shotguns work a little differently now. They're significantly more accurate at full visual range. The beam ones have a limited range. In other words, the ballistics are pretty good out at the most distant range, better than they were, certainly. And their aim bonus climbs as you get closer, making them incredibly accurate at very close ranges. The same is true for the beam, that is the laser and the pulse versions, but they have a shorter maximum range. In other words, they just can't be fired at, if it's anywhere past 18 range, which is a little over half of soldier standard visual range. And the last part of this is that marksman sniper rifles, those precision rifles, now quickly lose accuracy at ranges at range 24 or less, which is, if the maximum range is 30, that's about 2 tiles there at the edge of your standard visual range, at which they don't suffer a penalty. So expect them to be a lot less useful against enemies within medium or short range. Alright, so that's obviously a massive change to the game. I'm really looking for feedback, but it should mean that if you can get close to enemies, you can certainly hit them, whether they're flying or in heavy cover or not, as long as conditions are optimal. If you're all beat up or mind frayed, then you should still have a significant chance to miss no matter how close you are. But that should really boost infantry. I'm just trying to make snipers like good but not the best. There's a couple strategic reasons snipers are trouble is because they never get wounded if you know, don't get ambushed. So they can be used very often. So I'm trying to make them a little, you know, good. I'm trying to make them support troops, not like your bread and butter. So what else? So I've changed weapons up a bit. I've now classified weapons as high crit weapons, low crit weapons, and mixed. High crit weapons can be really, really effective. They represent burst fire weapons or weapons that strike exposed areas, and they have a chance to crit even against hardened opponents, and they're almost guaranteed to crit if you're properly kitted out or specialized via perks. These weapons are really effective against enemies that aren't hardened, and they're really, or against enemies that are not resilient. So I find that it feels kind of like they're great at bursting down like minion-y type enemies, and they're not as good against the tougher ones. So there's just some enemies that these weapons are going to be less effective against. Every enemy has a chance at being hardened and resilient, but it's not terribly high. So you'll want to pick your targets carefully with the high crit weapons because they can be really effective or they can be really ineffective. These weapons include machine pistols, personal defense weapons, that is the SMGs, non-beam shotguns, so ballistic, Gauss, and plasma, sniper rifles, and the LMG type weapons. All of these are very crit focused, and if you kit them out, you can almost guarantee you'll crit, except against enemies that are resistant to crits. And of course, if they do, then things like Bring 'em On and the analysis module can up that damage. And Killer Instinct and stuff. So high crit weapons can be really deadly, or they can be fairly ineffective. Note that sniper rifles were in there, which means that against resilient enemies, snipers are going to be significantly less effective. Low crit weapons are relatively effective against all targets, though incredibly unlikely to crit against hardened targets, and of course resilient targets cannot be critted against. These weapons are carbines, beam shotguns, battle rifles, and cannon type weapons. So they're pretty good against everything, but you're not going to get those super high bursty damage that you will from the high crit weapons. And then there's mixed weapons that, depending on your specialization and loadout, could go either way. That is the marksman rifles and the assault rifles. So keep that in mind when you're choosing your loadout. You'll probably want a couple high crit weapons, some low, and some mixed, depending on what kind of enemies you expect to face. And let's see. So machine pistols, I reduced the damage by 1, so they do exactly as much as the standard pistol does, but they have a higher crit chance, about 64% chance to crit. And remember, it's plus 30 if you're working against an exposed target. So their extra damage comes from crit chance, making them less effective against hardened and resilient enemies, but in general more effective and something you can work with. Like if you have crit bonuses, then they can do a lot of damage. The same for the point defense weapons, -1 damage, much higher crit chance. The same for sniper weapons, -1 damage, but much higher crit chance. So those were the weapons I was talking about. I added flush to drum magazine small item. So with extra ammo comes the ability to waste a bunch of it, driving enemies out, getting more accurate shots. This should let you, in general, guarantee that you can always hit something. Now, if you can damage it is another story, but... Alright, so that's all the tactical. Let's talk about Oh, no, there's one more tactical thing. Huge. I introduced elite enemy variants. So you can expect within the first month or two of running into enemies to see what I call badass and hulking enemy types. The hulking enemies will have a lot of extra health. Both of these enemies will have extra health. Hulking enemies will have a lot of extra health, whereas badass enemies will have like roughly 50% more health. Hulking enemies may have 100% or more extra health. They'll both deal extra damage. Hulking enemies will deal more damage, but badass will deal significantly more damage than normal. Hulking enemies will have an aim penalty, whereas badass enemies will have an aim bonus. And and hulking enemies will not have a will bonus, whereas badass enemies will have a will bonus. Badass enemies also have resilience, so they're immune to critical hits. So they're significantly better in every way and immune to critical hits, whereas hulking is much better in health and damage department, but that's all they get. And they come with an aim penalty. So you'll start seeing these variants a little after the race introduces itself in the tactical game. The idea is that since pods are small that you encounter and you start off with a number of troops, they kind of take multiple troops to deal with. I suggest taking a little more suppression if you weren't already, and a couple things to disable specific enemies, because these enemies will give you a run for your money, and you can get a hulking badass enemy, and of course any of this can stack with leaders, which can lead to situations you might want to retreat from. But tell me, I'm very curious to see how this balance goes. I've seen them in action. I play with them a bit. I haven't had too much time to play test. They're awesome. They seem really cool, and I really enjoy it. So, you may also encounter Paragon enemies. About 4 months after a race is introduced, there is a small chance of encountering an enemy with greatly increased statistics all around and a very powerful perk that is race specific. These enemies are very dangerous. So, this is, I know my game, version 1.1 was a little easy. So we're upping it a bit by adding in more interesting enemies. Alright, so let me go through the last couple things. On the tech side, research should be about 20% faster overall. I've reduced a bunch of costs, except in the Foundry where costs are much higher, but research time is incredibly fast. So check that out. I have added a bunch of little costs to a lot of other technologies, but that's it. Lastly, psionics is now much more, it's available much sooner. The training attempts are much faster. You only get 2 slots to train in. And there's a whole perk of column. There are 3 columns in your psi tree. And the center column is completely made of mundane perks. Squad Sight, Kill Zone, Precision. These perks are, if you don't want to increase your fatigue timer, but you do want someone to be psi, then you can go down this center tree. These are always available no matter what researches you've done. They're not locked in any way, like the other psi perks are. But they also don't grant you additional psi XP per mission. The other psi perks do. So if you choose Squad Sight instead of, say, Mind Merge, then you will level up psionically significantly slower than someone who does. And the more of those psi perks you take instead of the passive mundane perks, the faster you'll level up as a psi trooper. This should let you give everyone some amount of psi without suffering penalties you don't want to. You can treat it as like a secondary perk tree without increasing your fatigue timer if you want. But if you do want to really focus on getting the maximum amount of psi XP per level, then you're going to want to choose all psi perks, and you're going to want to take any of the equipment that grants psionic perks. Also, I believe the first responder perk that the command now has, the rethemed regen biofield, will also grant psi XP just because they couldn't get rid of it. So yeah, I expect psi to be accessible for most of your soldiers. There's not going to be any penalty for taking it because you can always choose like Squad Sight or something. And I'm just really excited to introduce psi sooner. I may even make it even easier to get. Currently it's even faster than the other researches. So you should be able to rush it fairly quickly, and it's kind of balanced for the beginning of the game. You'll also notice that willpower may be a little bit lower, but you get more for each psi level. So do that. Think of it as elitifying your troops. Alright, that is it for the perk changes. Stay tuned, and I'll have more awesome stuff for you. Until then, farewell, my friends. Farewell.